Okay, so the next question you want to ask is who owns the means of production? And there's really two big answers to this. The answers are essentially the capitalist answer and the socialist or Marxist answer, I guess is the way to put that. Sorry about all the red on there already. I tried this once and I failed, but I already have writing on there. I don't really know how to erase it, so we'll build from there. So the capitalist answer to the question of who owns the means of production. So means of production is just who owns the stuff that makes the stuff. So they get to make the decisions about what stuff is made. And the answer for capitalist is private property. They own the stuff. Now you might say, wait a minute, corporations really make stuff, not private individuals. All a corporation is a bunch of private individuals who come together and form this thing. So corporation is still considered a private property thing. The important thing here is it's not owned by the state. The government is not the thing that owns it. It's one of the reasons why when we talk about China, China's got sort of this weird hybrid thing going on because it definitely has some private property, capitalism, but it also has a number of businesses and corporations which the state is a co-owner or the primary owner. So that creates some sort of issues there. But let's just talk about private property for a second. The whole thing of capitalism, let me do capitalism for you in a nutshell. Here's capitalism in a nutshell. The whole thing's about private property. I'm rewarded for my work. So I get to take the stuff that I have, which tends to be just, for the most part, it tends to be the labor of my body and the stuff that I have. And I can use that to get more stuff back, to get more means back. So that's sort of how this whole thing works. So the harder that I work, or the better I invest my money, or the better choices I make in terms of what I produce, if I have like factories or something like that, or if it's just me as an individual, the better I do at that, the more I get back. So I have an incentive to work harder. I have an incentive to work smarter, and so do you. And that's what drives the whole thing forward, is that we all have this incentive to work harder, smarter, etc. If I don't work harder, if I don't work smarter, I'm not going to be rewarded as much, and there's a penalty for that, which is poverty, not all my dreams coming true, all that kind of stuff. If I do those things, I get rewarded in terms of more money, more stuff like that. This whole thing is driven by competition as well, is that if I have that incentive, you have that incentive too. So for example, there's two of us and there's one job. Ideally, the person who works the hardest and works the smartest should get that job. So I'm rewarded with, again, more stuff coming back to me in the form of income from that job. The two businesses, the one that makes the stuff that more consumers want is going to do well. The one that doesn't is going to die off, and hopefully something else takes its place. We talked about this before, creative destruction. When we talked about capitalism, creative destruction, this idea that a company that isn't doing what it should to sort of, is not sort of making money, not working harder or smarter, should go away. It should die off. And essentially something else should come up in its place. That's it. That's capitalism in a nutshell. If you like this, this is fantastic for you. Here's the downsides to this that we've kind of already talked about just a little bit. One of the big downsides, obviously, is inequality. Downside number one is going to be inequality, that with this system, if everything starts off completely equal, okay, great. One person wins and one person sort of loses in that competition. That's fantastic. But then the next time those two come up against each other, one's got the advantage because they've worked a little harder the time before. So even if, and again, over time, that split should become wider and will become wider and wider and wider. You'll get this growing inequality gap. And over time, the rich will continue to get richer. The poor will have fewer opportunities to ever sort of succeed in this system. This is a real big downside. It's not one that you can say, well, capitalism finds a way out of this. It really doesn't. This is what you're going to get with capitalism. If you're okay with that, then capitalism's the thing for you, honestly. This is one of its big downsides. If this doesn't faze you at all, then you're good with capitalism. If it does faze you, capitalism doesn't have a lot of things in it to fix it. You have to sort of be anti-capitalist to fix it. And that creates some issues as well. Another downside that sort of as a result of that is this thing called class warfare. And the idea that essentially Over time, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. The rich are going to start to see themselves as a group or a class, the rich, that need to protect their interests against this group called the poor, who will start to see themselves as a class. The poor class, the rich class, the working class, all that kind of stuff. Middle class, we use this term all over the place. And the whole system is really sort of set up that the rich, again, will continue to get richer. So, for example, the owners get all the profit. If there's a factory and you work in the factory, the owners get all the profit. If you work really hard that day, you get paid a wage. You don't get a chunk of the profits. In other words, the way that capitalism works is whoever makes the risk in terms of money is the one who gets the rewards in terms of the profit. It doesn't have to be that way. It's just the way we set capitalism up to work. So the workers end up selling their labor, their body, for a wage, which Marx sort of made the analogy with prostitution here, which essentially ends up being perpetual oppression. Well, okay, if you feel like you're being oppressed so badly, stop working at that place. Okay, well then what do I do to survive? Well, you have to go work somewhere else. So you're just changing... I'm trying to think of a way to say this that's nice. I can't think of a way of saying that's nice. You're changing neighborhoods, but you're not changing your job, which is being a prostitute, I guess is the way to phrase it. I know that sounds really awful, but that's sort of the idea here is that. So according to Marx, for example, this group down here is going to say this whole system is rigged against us. That yes, maybe if everybody started off equal, it would be a great system, but that's not where we are today. So the system sucks. We got to get rid of the system. A revolution. And even short of revolution, you at least have conflict between these two groups. So that's going to be sort of capitalism, private property. If you don't really care that much about inequality, man, this thing is the thing for you. If you do, it's got some inherent problems in it. Maybe not all the way to the point of revolution, but it definitely has some inherent problems with it. The other side of the system, who owns the means of production, is what we call socialism. Socialism or Marxism, if you want to do sort of the more philosophical side of it. And that is who owns the means of production? We own the means of production. Common ownership. So, and not talking about a corporation here per se. A corporation is still privately owned by those who sort of buy into it. Socialism, common ownership is essentially we, meaning whatever group us is, get to own the things together. Now, just to clarify a couple terms you probably heard over your lifetime, there is socialism. Socialism is where the state is kind of in charge of this. So if we, all of us people, own this, that's messy. What are we going to do? Have a meeting every day where all of us people get together and say, here's what we think we should be doing. So what we do is we get this thing called the government, the state. It acts on our behalf, and that is socialism. The ideal being, though, that at some point the people can sort of figure this out, and that would be communism, where the people control it. They don't need a state anymore to intervene on their behalf. The people do this. And there's some good Marxist reasons behind that. I'm not going to talk about that now, but just so you know the difference between those two things. This has never existed at a state level. Sometimes you have co-ops and things like that, or a collective farm that may work like this. But at the level of sort of an entire society, it's always been socialism, which has intended to move this direction, but has always been socialism where the state controls it, not the people. The state controlling it on behalf of the people. That's the idea here. So let me give you an example of this, especially from the Soviet past, the Russian past. That's collectivization. Collectivization is agricultural socialism. Okay, so let's do a little story time here. So let's say this is our farmland here. Okay, and this farmland is owned by each of these plots is owned by a farmer. So we've got what? I don't know how many farmers here. 20 farmers. So 20 farmers growing things in our capitalist system of private property. If I work really hard, I can take my land and I can really do well off of it. If I don't work hard, I get nothing for it. That's sort of the private property version. Collectivization, agricultural socialism, we're going to take all this land and we're going to eliminate these plots. So now 20 families own all this land in common. So again, you see how this gets rid of our inequality problem, right? We all own this. I own 1/20th of it. You own 1/20th of it. It's not like because my family has worked harder over the generations, I own 1/5 of the wealth. We all basically have the same amount. So it fixed the equality problem. Okay. So you take the land from the owners, and then you have these large farms that are owned in common by farmers. Now, the state then steps in and says, here's what we need. We need more wheat. So you guys need to grow wheat. Well, we kind of want to grow soybeans. No, we need wheat. We don't need soybeans. Go, you grow wheat. So this works at a societal level because the state is telling the farmers what it needs produced for the people. So production, distribution is managed by the state. That's collectivization. Now, tell me, do you think that that system is a good system? I mean, it definitely gets rid of our inequality problem. It kind of gets rid of our class warfare problem because we don't really have classes anymore unless you talk about the state being in charge. But remember, the state's trying to go away, so don't worry about that. It really solves our problems from private property. So does it work? Here's a downside. At least the way it's been practiced up till now, I would not be one of those people who says it never works. But I would definitely say the way it's been done historically, it has not worked yet. Could it work? Maybe, but it hasn't. So for example, what happened in this case is when you did this, like think about it, if you're one of these families, are you going to work really hard anymore? Right? The private property system really does sort of push you to work hard, almost to the point of, we almost call this a bad thing in the world today where people work, 80 hours a week, and they just sort of pour their lives into their work and do nothing else but work. And that's the same thing here, but essentially you've taken away that incentive now. If I work harder, I don't get more than everybody else. I get the same amount as everybody else. So if I work hard and that guy over there just sleeps all day, we both get the same amount. So what's my incentive to work? I don't really have one. And that becomes part of the problem here. Is this actually ended up with mass starvation in the Soviet Union in the 1930s when they put this in place. Ukraine still has a problem with Russia today because of the mass number of deaths that happened. Like millions, tens of millions of people died in Ukraine as a result of this back in the 1930s. There's this lack of incentive to work the common lands. So you solve the inequality problem, but you haven't solved sort of the incentive to work problem. And so again, we would say probably, what is the best system here? This is a little less of a sliding scale like the last one and much more of a, you're either this or you're that in the whole thing. This is one of the things. So going back to other things, if you don't care about inequality, capitalism is the thing for you. Well, what if I do care about inequality? Is capitalism the best system? The answer is, it's not great, but then you might say, but maybe it's better than this other one. So we might still want to look for a third way to do things. Like capitalism is sort of the end-all, be-all, but is socialism, Marxism the way to go? Not the way it's been practiced so far. Maybe somebody can figure out how to make it work correctly. Who knows? So that's that. Again, the idea here being we're moving, transitology, we're moving from, or Russia in 1992 is going to move from this system to our capitalist system. What kind of issues is that going to raise when you take this plot of land and divide it up 20 ways? What kind of issues is it going to raise when you take all the nickel mines or copper mines in Russia, and now they have to be owned by individuals? Who's going to own them? One of the things we're going to get out of this is we're going to get things like oligarchs, which is a term you're going to see sort of come up. Whoever has the ability to buy these things, they're the ones that are going to buy them. It's messy. Just a couple questions I just want to throw out there really fast, and you're not really have to answer them, but these are some of the problems of transitology. Like, what are the potential problems of moving from a controlled to a market economy? And what are the potential problems of moving from common ownership to private property? These are the things that the Soviet Union basically had to face in the 1990s. And we could still, as you guys have done in your collateral readings and things like that, have they solved them today? Is a real open question. All right, that's it. I will talk to you guys on Monday. Have a great weekend.